The November wind cut through the small town of Cedar Ridge like a cold blade, carrying with it the scent of dying leaves and the promise of a harsh winter ahead. Main Street stretched out under flickering streetlights, most of the storefronts dark, except for one lonely beacon of light at the far endâ, Rosie's Diner. A place that had fed truckers, travelers, and late-night souls for over 30 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Inside, the familiar sounds of sizzling bacon and clinking coffee cups mixed with the soft hum of an old jukebox playing Patsy Cline. The red vinyl booths, cracked from decades of use, held the stories of 1,000 conversations, and the black and white checkered floor bore the scuff marks of countless boots that had walked through those doors, seeking comfort, warmth, or simply a place to belong. Behind the counter stood Sarah Beth Morrison, 23 years old and 6 months pregnant, her small frame carrying not just the weight of new life, but the burden of secrets that threatened to crush her spirit. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, strands escaping to frame a face that was still beautiful despite the dark circles under her green, eyes that carried a fear so deep it seemed to echo in every movement she made. If you believe that even in our darkest moments, angels can appear in the most unexpected forms. If you believe in second chances and the power of human kindness to change everything, then take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to this channel. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from tonight, because this story might just restore your faith that there are still heroes among us, riding on steel horses and carrying hearts bigger than the engines beneath them. Sarah Beth had been working the late shift at Rosie's for 8 months now. Ever since she'd moved to Cedar Ridge with nothing but a suitcase and a heart full of hope that seemed increasingly naive with each passing day. She'd come here to escape, to start fresh, to build a life for herself and the baby growing inside her. What she hadn't counted on was meeting Danny Corvin. Danny owned the auto parts store 3 blocks down from the diner. To most people in town, he seemed like a decent enough menâ, polite, well-dressed, always ready with a smile and a compliment. He'd started coming into the diner about 2 months after Sarah Beth began working there, always ordering the same thing: black coffee and apple pie, always sitting in booth number 7 where he could watch her work. At first, his attention had been flattering. Sarah Beth was alone in a new town, pregnant and scared, and Danny's interest had felt like a lifeline. He was older a 38 to her 23 a, and he seemed stable, successful, the kind of man who could provide the security she desperately needed. When he asked her out, she'd said yes, partly out of loneliness and partly out of the practical fear of raising a child alone. But what had started as gentle courtship had slowly twisted into something darker. Danny's compliments became critiques disguised as concern. "You're getting pretty big there, honey. Maybe you should watch what you're eating." His offers to help became demands masked as suggestions. "You shouldn't be on your feet so much. Maybe it's time you quit this job. I can take care of you." The breaking point had come 3 weeks ago when Sarah Beth had politely declined his invitation to move in with him. She tried to explain that she wasn't ready, that she needed more time, that she wanted to be sure. Danny's charming facade had cracked like old paint, revealing something cold and controlling underneath. "You think you're too good for me?" He'd hissed, his hand gripping her wrist just a little too tight. "You think someone else is going to want a knocked-up waitress with no family and no money? You think you have choices here?" Since that night, Danny had made her life a carefully orchestrated nightmare. He would sit in his usual booth for hours, just watching her, making her skin crawl with his constant stare. He'd started showing up at her apartment building, claiming he was just checking on her. He'd had flowers delivered to the diner with notes that read like threats disguised as romance. "Can't wait until you come to your senses, and every baby needs a father." The other waitresses had noticed. Doris, the 60-year-old veteran who'd been working at Rosie since Carter was president, had pulled Sarah Beth aside just yesterday. "Honey, that man ain't right," she'd whispered, glancing nervously toward booth 7. where Danny sat nursing his fourth cup of coffee. The way he looks at you. It's like you're something he owns instead of someone he loves. But what could Sarah Beth do? She had no family to turn to. Her parents had disowned her when she'd gotten pregnant, claiming she was a disgrace to their good Christian name. She had maybe $800 in savings, barely enough to cover next month's rent, let alone escape to somewhere Danny couldn't find her. The police had been polite but unhelpful when she tried to report his behavior. Has he threatened you directly? Has he touched you inappropriately? Ma'am, we can't arrest a man for sitting in a diner. On this particular November night, the diner was quieter than usual. The truckers who normally filled the place had been delayed by a storm system moving through the state, and the usual local crowd had stayed home to avoid the bitter wind. Only 3 customers remained: an elderly farmer reading yesterday's newspaper over a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold, a young couple sharing a piece of chocolate cake and whispering sweet nothings, and Danny Corvin in booth 7, his eyes following Sarah Beth's every movement like a predator tracking prey. At 11:47 p.m., the bell above the door chimed, and everything changed. The man who walked through that door was like something out of a different world. 6 feet 3 inches of weathered leather and steel. His presence seemed to fill the entire diner despite his measured movements. His name was Marcus Iron Donnelly, though most people just called him Iron. And he was the president of the Broken Chain Motorcycle Club a brotherhood of men who had found family in each other when the world had turned its back on them. Iron's leather vest bore the patches that told his story. The Broken Chain logo across his broad back, the president's patch on his chest, and smaller patches that spoke of roads traveled, battles fought. His graying beard was neatly trimmed, his long hair pulled back in a ponytail that revealed eyes the color of storm clouds, eyes that had seen too much pain in the world but hadn't yet given up on finding beauty in it. He chose a booth near the back, close enough to the warmth of the kitchen but far enough from the other customers to maintain the solitude he preferred. When Sarah Beth approached with the coffee pot, her hands trembling slightly as she poured, Iron noticed everything. The way she kept glancing toward booth 7, the dark circles under her eyes, the protective way she held herself, one hand unconsciously resting on her rounded belly. "Thank you, darlin'," Iron said softly, his voice carrying a warmth that contrasted sharply with his intimidating appearance. "You take care of yourself now." Sarah Beth looked up, surprised by the genuine kindness in his tone. For a moment, their eyes met, and she saw something there that she hadn't seen in a long time: safety. Not the false security that Danny offered with his conditions and control, but real safety, the kind that asked for nothing in return. Can I get you anything else?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Iron studied her face for a moment, noting the fear that seemed to radiate from her like heat from a fever. "Just the coffee for now," he said. "But thank you for asking." As Sarah Beth turned to walk away, she felt Danny's eyes boring into her back. She glanced toward booth 7 and saw him leaning forward, his jaw clenched, his hands gripping his coffee cup so tightly his knuckles had gone white. The sight of another man being kind to her, especially a man like Iron, had clearly triggered something dark in Danny's possessive nature. For the next hour, Iron sat quietly, occasionally sipping his coffee and observing the subtle drama unfolding around him. He watched Danny watch Sarah Beth. He noticed how the pregnant waitress flinched every time the auto parts store owner moved. He saw the way her hands shook when she had to walk past his booth, the way she seemed to shrink into herself whenever their eyes met. Iron had seen enough controlling men in his life to recognize the signs. He'd grown up with one a father who had ruled their household with an iron fist disguised as loving protection, who had convinced Iron's mother that his jealousy was proof of his devotion right up until the night he'd put her in the hospital for talking to the mailman. Iron had been 16 then, and he'd sworn that night that he would never stand by and watch a woman be terrorized by a man who claimed to love her. At 12:43 a.m., the elderly farmer left, folding his newspaper neatly and leaving exact change on the table. The young couple followed 10 minutes later, their laughter fading as they stepped out into the cold night. That left only Iron, Danny, and the small crew of late-shift workers in the diner's kitchen. Sarah Beth was wiping down tables when it happened. As she bent to clean booth 3, her pregnancy making the movement awkward, Danny suddenly stood up from his seat. The sound of his boots hitting the floor echoed through the quiet diner like gunshots. "Sarah Beth," Danny called out, his voice carrying an edge that made Iron's jaw tighten. "I think it's time we had another talk." Sarah Beth froze, her rag halfway across the table's surface. "Danny, I'm working. Can we talk tomorrow?" "No," Danny said, taking a step toward her. "We can't keep playing these games. You're being ridiculous, and you know it. We belong together. That baby belongs with me." "That's not." Sarah Beth started, but her voice cracked. She glanced desperately toward the kitchen, hoping Doris or one of the cooks might emerge. But the sounds from back there indicated they were busy with closing duties. Danny took another step closer. "You think you're going to find someone better? Look at yourself, Sarah Beth. You're 6 months pregnant with another man's baby. You're broke, you're alone. I'm offering you a life, a real life, and you're throwing it away because of some fantasy. That Prince Charming is going to ride in here and save you." Iron's hands had slowly curled into fists on the table. Every instinct he'd developed over 47 years of life was screaming at him to intervene, but he'd learned to be strategic in his interventions. "Move too fast, and you might make things worse for the person you're trying to help." "Danny, please," Sarah Beth whispered, backing toward the counter. "I've told you how I feel. I'm grateful for your interest, but I need to focus on my baby right now. I need to focus on taking care of myself." "You can't take care of yourself." Danny's voice rose, and Iron saw Sarah Beth flinch as if she'd been struck. "Look at you. You're exhausted. You're scared. You're working a dead-end job for tips that barely cover your rent. I can give you everything you need, everything that baby needs. All you have to do is stop being so damn stubborn and admit that you need me." That's when Sarah Beth did something that would change everything. With Danny advancing on her and nowhere left to retreat, she quickly grabbed a napkin from the dispenser and scribbled something on it with her pen. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely write, but desperation gave her the courage to take a risk that felt impossible just moments before. Moving as casually as she could manage, Sarah Beth walked to Iron's table to refill his coffee cup. As she poured, she slipped the napkin under his saucer, her green eyes meeting his for just a moment, a moment that conveyed more desperation and hope than 1,000 words could have expressed. Iron didn't look down at the napkin immediately. Instead, he kept his gaze fixed on Danny, who had stopped his advance but was still standing in the middle of the diner like a storm cloud ready to burst. Only when Sarah Beth had moved away did Iron carefully lift his saucer and read what she had written. The handwriting was barely legible, shaky with fear and desperation, but the words hit Iron like a physical blow. "Please help me leave. You won't let me go. I'm scared for my baby. Please." Iron read the note 3 times, each reading strengthening his resolve. He'd been riding with a broken chain for over 20 years, and in that time, he'd learned that there were moments when a man had to choose between walking away and standing up. This was one of those moments. Carefully, Iron folded the napkin and slipped it into his vest pocket. Then he stood up, his 6'3" frame unfolding with deliberate slowness, his presence suddenly commanding every bit of attention in the room. Danny turned toward him, his eyes narrowing. "Something I can help you with, friend?" Iron smiled, but it wasn't a friendly expression. It was the kind of smile that had made grown men reconsider their life choices on dark roads and in darker alleys. "Actually," Iron said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man who had never needed to raise it to be heard, "I think I might be able to help you." "Me?" Danny laughed, but there was nervousness in the sound. "I don't need any help, thanks. Just having a conversation with my girlfriend here." "That's funny," Iron said, taking a step toward Danny. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks more like you're harassing a pregnant woman who's just trying to do her job." Danny's face flushed red. "This is none of your business, old man. Sarah Beth and I have history. We have a relationship." "No," Sarah Beth said suddenly, her voice stronger than it had been all night. We don't have a relationship, Danny. I've told you that. I've told you to leave me alone. Iron nodded approvingly. Seems pretty clear to me, he said to Danny. The lady's not interested. Time for you to move along. Danny's hands clenched into fists at his sides. Who the hell do you think you are? You think because you've got that leather jacket and those tattoos, you can just walk in here and tell me what to do? This is my town. I know everyone here. You're nobody. Iron's smile widened, and somehow that made him look even more dangerous. You're right about one thing, he said. This is your town, and in about 30 seconds, everyone in it is going to know exactly what kind of man you really are. He pulled out his cell phone and hit a number on speed dial. The call connected immediately. Tank, it's Iron. Yeah, I'm going to need the boys down at Rosie's Diner on Main Street. We've got a situation here that needs some community attention. He paused, listening. Yeah, that's right. The whole crew. And Tank, bring the cameras. I think the folks online would be very interested in meeting Mr. Danny Corvin here. Danny's face went from red to pale in the space of a heartbeat. Cameras? What are you talking about? See, Danny, Iron said, slipping his phone back into his pocket. I've got about 50 brothers who are going to be here in the next 10 minutes. And we've got this thing we do where we document men who think it's okay to terrorize pregnant women. We post those videos online, send them to their employers, their families, their churches. We make sure the whole world knows exactly what kind of man they're dealing with. Sarah Beth stared at Iron in amazement. In all her planning, in all her desperate fantasizing about escape, she had never imagined that help might come in the form of a graying biker who looked like he could wrestle bears for fun. Danny was backing toward the door now, his bravado evaporating like steam. This is crazy. You're all crazy. Sarah Beth, you're making a huge mistake. I was offering you everything, and you're choosing this? You're choosing them? She's not choosing anything, Iron said calmly. She's just exercising her right to be left alone, something you seem to have trouble understanding. The sound of motorcycles in the distance began as a low rumble, like thunder on the horizon. But as it grew closer, it became something more euro, a symphony of engines, a mechanical heartbeat that seemed to shake the very foundations of the diner. Danny's eyes went wide as the sound grew louder. Through the diner's windows, headlights began to appear, cutting through the darkness like fallen stars. One by one, motorcycles pulled into the parking lot, their riders dismounting with the synchronized precision of a military unit. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Tank Morrison was the first through the door Euro, 6 feet 5 inches of pure muscle, his bald head gleaming under the diner's fluorescent lights, his leather vest straining across a chest that looked like it had been carved from granite. Behind him came Preacher, the club's vice president, whose quiet demeanor and advanced degree in psychology masked a fierce protective instinct that had saved more than one lost soul over the years. Next came Snake, the club's enforcer, whose network of tattoos told the story of a man who had crawled out of hell and decided to help others do the same. Diesel followed, the club's treasurer, whose skills with numbers were matched only by his skills with his fists when the situation called for it. One by one, they filed in. Ghost, the club's sergeant-at-arms, whose pale blue eyes seemed to see straight through to a man's soul. Roadkill, the club's secretary, whose morbid nickname belied a gentle nature and a gift for making broken things whole again. Hammer, the youngest of the group at 28, whose enthusiasm for justice was matched only by his enthusiasm for the open road. Within 5 minutes, Rosie's Diner had been transformed from a quiet late-night eatery into the headquarters of the most formidable protective force Danny Corvin had ever encountered. The bikers spread out through the restaurant, not aggressively, but with the kind of casual authority that made it clear. They owned the space now. Iron walked over to Sarah Beth, who was standing behind the counter, with tears streaming down her face. Euro, not tears of fear, but tears of relief, so profound they seemed to come from the very depths of her soul. Ma'am, Iron said softly, My name is Marcus Donnelly, but my friends call me Iron. These are my brothers from the Broken Chain Motorcycle Club. We got your message, and we want you to know that you're safe now. Nobody is going to hurt you, and nobody is going to force you to do anything you don't want to do." Sarah Beth nodded, unable to speak. She had spent so many nights lying awake, wondering if she would ever feel safe again, wondering if her baby would grow up in a world where men like Danny Corvin could just take whatever they wanted. Now, surrounded by these leather-clad guardians, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. Tank approached Danny, who was still frozen near the door, like a deer caught in headlights. "Mr. Corvin," Tank said, his voice surprisingly gentle for such an imposing man. "I think you need to understand something. This young lady has asked you to leave her alone. She's made her feelings clear. Now you have a choice. You can walk out that door right now, go home, and never bother her again. Or you can keep making this difficult, and we can discuss your behavior with the whole town." "You can't threaten me," Danny stammered, but his voice lacked any conviction. "I have rights too. This is America." "Absolutely," Preacher said, stepping forward. His voice carried the authority of someone who had spent years counseling people through their darkest moments. "You have the right to leave this woman alone. You have the right to find someone who actually wants to be with you. You have the right to build a life that doesn't depend on terrorizing someone who's already scared and vulnerable." Ghost pulled out his phone and held it up. "And we have the right to record this conversation and share it with anyone who might be interested in knowing how you treat pregnant women." Danny looked around the diner, taking in the circle of leather-clad men who surrounded him. For the first time in his life, he was facing a force he couldn't intimidate, couldn't control, couldn't manipulate. These men weren't impressed by his local connections or his financial stability. They saw him for exactly what he was: a predator who preyed on vulnerable women. "Fine," Danny said, his voice cracking. "Fine. You want her? You can have her. But don't come crying to me when she needs help and you realize you can't save everyone." Iron's expression didn't change. "We're not saving her," he said quietly. "She's saving herself. We're just making sure she has the space to do it." Danny looked at Sarah Beth one last time, and she saw something in his eyes that chilled her to the bone. Euro, not acceptance, but the cold calculation of a man making plans. Then he turned and walked out of the Agrai diner, the bell above the door chiming his departure like a funeral toll. For a moment, silence filled the space where Danny's presence had been. Then, Tank clapped his hands together, the sound echoing through the diner like a gunshot. "All right," he said, his voice taking on a businesslike tone. "Let's talk about what happens next." Iron pulled out a chair at one of the tables and gestured for Sarah Beth to sit down. "First thing," he said, "you need to know that you're not alone anymore. What just happened here isn't the end of this situation. Euro. It's the beginning of something better." Sarah Beth sank into the chair, her legs suddenly too weak to support her. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why are you helping me? You don't even know me." Preacher sat down across from her, his eyes kind but serious. "Ma'am, every one of us in this room has been where you are right now. Maybe not exactly the same situation, but that feeling of being trapped, of being afraid, of thinking there's no way out. We've all been there." Tank nodded. "The difference is, we found each other. We found a family that doesn't judge, doesn't abandon, doesn't make love conditional on control. And when we see someone who needs that same kind of family, well, that's what we do." Iron leaned forward. "Sarah Beth, Euro. And I hope it's okay that I use your name. Euro. We want to help you build a life where you feel safe, where your baby can grow up safe. But we need to know what you want. This is your choice, your life. We're just here to make sure you actually have choices." Sarah Beth looked around the table at these rough, intimidating men who were speaking to her with more respect and kindness than she'd experienced in months. "I want to leave," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I want to go somewhere Danny can't find me. I want to have my baby in peace, and I want to raise him or her without looking over my shoulder every day. Then that's what we're going to make happen," Iron said simply. What followed was the most extraordinary night of Sarah Beth's life. The broken chain didn't just offer sympathy or temporary protection €. They offered a complete escape plan, executed with the precision of a military operation. Diesel, it turned out, had connections with a women's shelter network that spanned 3 states. Within an hour, he had arranged for Sarah Beth to be placed in a facility in Colorado where she could live safely until her baby was born and beyond if needed. Ghost, whose day job was working for a moving company, arranged for Sarah Beth's few belongings to be collected from her apartment and transported to her new location. Pack light, he advised. Start fresh. We'll make sure you have everything you need. Hammer, who despite his fearsome appearance had a gentle way with frightened people, sat with Sarah Beth while she called her boss at the diner to explain that she was leaving immediately for her safety. When Rosie herself a tough-as-nails woman in her 70s heard what had been happening under her own roof, she not only gave Sarah Beth her full support, but also contributed $500 from the diner's emergency fund to help with her relocation. Tank handled the most delicate task of all, making sure Danny Corvin understood that his behavior towards Sarah Beth was being watched by people who took such things very seriously. The conversation, which took place in the parking lot behind the auto parts store at 3 a.m., was brief and to the point. Tank later reported that Mr. Corvin had been very receptive to their suggestions about anger management counseling and the importance of respecting women's boundaries. By dawn, Sarah Beth was in Preacher's pickup truck, heading west toward a new life. Her few possessions were in the back, along with a care package the club had assembled. Baby clothes and supplies donated by the wives and girlfriends of club members. Enough money to get her settled in her new place and a cell phone with all of their numbers programmed in. If you ever need anything, Iron had told her as they said goodbye, you call us. It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter what time it is. You're family now. Sarah Beth had cried then, not from fear or desperation, but from the overwhelming gratitude of someone who had been drowning and suddenly found herself lifted to safety by hands she never expected to reach for her. 3 weeks later, Iron received a text message from a Colorado area code. It's a girl. Her name is Hope. Thank you for giving us both a chance at life. But the story didn't end there. What happened next would become the stuff of legend in Cedar Ridge, a tale that would be told and retold until it became part of the town's folklore. Danny Corvin, it seemed, had not learned his lesson as thoroughly as Tank had hoped. Within a month of Sarah Beth's departure, he had set his sights on another woman Maria Santos, a young single mother who worked at the town's grocery store. The pattern was depressingly familiar. The charming courtship, the escalating demands, the threats disguised as concern. But Maria had something Sarah Beth hadn't had She had heard the story of the pregnant waitress and the bikers who had saved her. When Danny started making her life miserable, she knew exactly who to call. Iron and his brothers returned to Cedar Ridge on a cold December morning, their motorcycles cutting through the early snowfall like dark angels descending from heaven. This time, they didn't wait for a confrontation at the grocery store. They went directly to Danny's house. The conversation that took place on Danny Corvin's front porch was witnessed by half the neighborhood, and within hours, everyone in Cedar Ridge knew the story. The broken chain had made it clear that their protection extended to any woman in town who needed it, and that men like Danny Corvin would find their behavior scrutinized by people who had the resources and the will to do something about it. Danny left town that same week. Some said he moved to his brother's place in Arizona. Others claimed he'd gone north to Montana. Nobody particularly cared as long as he was gone. But the impact of the broken chain's intervention went far beyond just removing one problematic man from the community. Their actions had sent a message that rippled through Cedar Ridge like stones thrown into still water. Women who had been suffering in silence began to speak up. The town's domestic violence resources, which had been virtually non-existent, suddenly found themselves with funding and volunteer support from unexpected sources. The broken chain established a safe house fund that helped women escape dangerous situations, and they partnered with local law enforcement to ensure that such cases received the attention they deserved. Most importantly, the culture of the town began to shift. The idea that men could intimidate and control women without consequence became socially unacceptable in a way it never had been before. Young men growing up in Cedar Ridge learned that real strength meant protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, not taking advantage of vulnerability. The story spread beyond Cedar Ridge, carried by social media and word of mouth to other small towns across the country. Other motorcycle clubs began adopting similar protective programs. Women in dangerous situations learned that there were people willing to help them escape, people who asked for nothing in return except the chance to do what was right. Sarah Beth and baby Hope became symbols of hope themselves. The photos Iron received over the months a year, Hope's first smile, her first steps, her first day of kindergarten a year, served as reminders to the broken chain of why their work mattered. Sarah Beth eventually became a nurse, specializing in helping other women through difficult pregnancies and dangerous situations. On Hope's 5th birthday, Sarah Beth drove back to Cedar Ridge for the first time since that night at Rosie's diner. She wanted her daughter to meet the men who had made her life possible, wanted to show them the woman she had become and the child who represented everything good that could grow from the darkest of circumstances. The reunion took place at the Broken Chains Clubhouse, a modest building on the outskirts of town that served as headquarters for their various charitable activities. Hope, a bright-eyed little girl with her mother's green eyes, and her father Sayuro, a good man. Sarah Beth had met in Colorado a Euro curly hair, was initially shy around the imposing bikers. But within minutes, she had Tank pushing her on a swing they'd installed in the clubhouse yard, while Iron taught her how to make the motorcycle engines roar by twisting the throttles. I wanted her to know, Sarah Beth told Iron as they watched. Hope playing with the men who had saved her life, that there are still heroes in the world. That when things seem impossible, when it feels like nobody cares, there are people who will fight for what's right just because it's right. Iron smiled, the same gentle expression that had given Sarah Beth hope on that terrifying night 5 years ago. She'll never need heroes like us, he said. She's growing up in a world where she knows she's valued, where she knows she has choices. That's the best protection we could ever give her. As the sun set over Cedar Ridge that day, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Hope ran up to Iron with a dandelion she'd picked from the yard. This is for you, she said solemnly, presenting the flower with the gravity of a child making an important decision. Mama says you're the reason I got to be born safe. Iron knelt down to accept the dandelion, his weathered hands gentle as he took the small gift. No, sweetheart, he said softly. Your Mama is the reason you got to be born safe. She was brave enough to ask for help when she needed it. We just made sure she had the chance to be brave. Hope considered this for a moment, then threw her arms around Iron's neck in a fierce hug. Thank you for helping my mama be brave, she whispered, as Iron hugged the little girl back, feeling the weight of her trust and innocence. He thought about all the roads he'd traveled, all the mistakes he'd made, all the darkness he'd seen in the world. And he realized that sometimes the most important journeys didn't take you to new place a euro. They brought you home to the person you were always meant to be. The story of the pregnant waitress and the bikers who saved her became more than just a tale told in diners and bars across the country. It became a reminder that heroism doesn't always look the way we expect it to, that sometimes angels wear leather and ride motorcycles, and that the most powerful force in the world is the decision to stand up for someone who can't stand up for themselves. In a world that often seems too dark, too dangerous, too indifferent to the suffering of the vulnerable, stories like Sarah Beth's serve as beacons of hope. They remind us that there are still people who believe in doing what's right, not because it's easy or profitable or socially acceptable, but because it's right. They remind us that family isn't always about blood a euro. Sometimes it's about choosing to protect and care for people who need protection and care. They remind us that the strongest among us have a responsibility to shield the most vulnerable, and that true strength is measured not by what you can take, but by what you're willing to give. Most importantly, they remind us that in our darkest moments, when we feel most alone and most afraid, there might just be someone out there ready to ride through the night to help us find our way to safety. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that there are still good people in this world, If it gave you hope that help can come from the most unexpected places, then please take a moment to like, comment, and share this video. Tell someone else this story. Spread the word that kindness still exists, that heroes still ride among us, and that sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply refuse to let the vulnerable suffer alone. And in the comments below, share your own story of a time when someone helped you when you needed it most, or a time when you had the chance to help someone else. Because these stories these moments of human connection and compassion are what keep the light burning in a world that sometimes seems determined to extinguish it. Tell us where you're watching from tonight, and tell us that you still believe in the power of ordinary people to do extraordinary things, because that belief, shared by enough people, might just be enough to change the world. Remember, sometimes heroes don't wear capes. Sometimes they wear leather vests and ride steel horses. Sometimes they show up at the exact moment when you've given up hope, and they remind you that you're not alone, that you matter, and that your story isn't over yet. Sometimes they remind you that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the willingness to act in spite of fear, for the sake of someone who needs you to be brave. And sometimes, just sometimes, they help you write a better ending than the one you thought was possible. Asterisk word count. 6,247 words. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Final message. Asterisk, asterisk. Like this video if you believe in second chances and the power of brotherhood. Share it if you think everyone deserves to feel safe. Comment below if you still believe there are heroes among us. And subscribe to keep these stories of hope and courage alive in a world that desperately needs them. Because at the end of the day, we all need to know that someone, somewhere, is willing to ride through the darkness to bring us home to the presence. Light. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.